A weapon that costs about $50 can destroy a tank worth more than $4 million. That's not an exaggeration. It has happened in one form or another for nearly a century. In March of 2024, a Ukrainian soldier sitting in a trench flew a drone that cost less than $400 into the turret of a Russian T-90M tank. The tank was worth an estimated $4.3 million. It didn't survive, and what killed it wasn't a missile or a rival tank. It was a machine that cost less than a used bicycle. That trade wasn't luck. 85 years earlier, Finnish soldiers were doing something similar with gasoline in glass bottles. 50 years before that, engineers were designing steel obstacles that could stop a machine weighing 40 tons without firing a single round. Tanks are among the most expensive machines a nation can build. They have also spent the last 85 years being humbled by things a soldier could carry in one hand. This isn't a story about cheap gear getting lucky against expensive gear. It's a story about geometry. Every tank ever built is a compromise between armor, weight, speed, and cost, and that compromise leaves gaps. The men who found those gaps didn't need a bigger budget. They needed to understand the machine better than its own designers did. These are 7 times a solution worth pocket change stopped a machine worth millions, and the engineering reason each one worked. A Finnish soldier presses himself flat against a snowbank as a Soviet tank grinds past. In his hand, a glass bottle, already burning. By November 1939, the Soviet Union had crossed into Finland with roughly 6,000 tanks. Finland could barely field enough anti-tank guns to matter. What Finnish soldiers had instead was gasoline, empty bottles, and rags, a weapon that would come to be known as the Molotov Cocktail. Soviet tanks of the period ran on gasoline engines mounted at the rear, behind ventilation grates that were never built to survive fire. Smash a burning bottle against those vents, and the fuel found its way into the engine bay, cooking the tank from the inside out. Deep snow packed the tanks into narrow columns. By the end of the war, Finland had knocked out more than 2,000 of the roughly 6,000 tanks the Soviets had committed. Fire worked, but it meant a soldier risking his life every single time. The next obstacle on this list needed no soldier standing anywhere nearby at all. No soldier has to be anywhere near it. That's the entire idea behind the anti-tank mine. The first ones appeared within weeks of the first tanks. When British tanks rolled onto the Somme in 1916, German troops buried artillery shells nose up under wooden planks studded with nails. The mechanism barely changed for the next century. A steel case, a few kilograms of explosive, buried under a pressure fuse. The tank's own weight does the arming. No wires, no signal, just the machine detonating itself. It targets the one part of a tank no designer can armor properly, the tracks and the wheels beneath them. Sever a track, and a 60-ton machine becomes a 60-ton target, unable to move, waiting for artillery to finish it. At Kursk in 1943, Soviet engineers packed some sectors with as many as 1,500 anti-tank mines per square kilometer. A mine that costs a few dollars doesn't need to outsmart the tank. It only needs to outweight it. The next obstacle on this list skipped the explosive altogether. How do you stop a 40-ton tank without firing a shot? You give it something to trip over. The Czech Hedgehog is a welded steel obstacle from Czechoslovakia's border defenses in the late 1930s, built from scrap rail, angle iron, and a welder for almost nothing. When a tank drives over one, the obstacle rolls under the tracks and wedges against the belly, turning into a fulcrum that lifts the tracks just enough off the ground that the tank's own weight starts working against it. It doesn't need to punch through armor because the belly of a tank is the one place armor is always thinnest. Every ton of steel bolted onto the front and sides is a ton that couldn't go underneath. It wasn't perfect. Against the heaviest tanks, nearly 40% of breakthrough attempts still succeeded, but the design refused to disappear. More than 80 years later, civilians in Kiev who had never built one before were welding the same shape from scrap in 2022. Geometry could disable a single tank, but only if the tank drove over it first. The next weapon on this list didn't wait. A soldier would have to go to the tank instead. A German soldier sprints alongside a moving tank carrying 3 kilograms of explosive built around 3 horseshoe magnets, nicknamed the Panzerknacker, the tank cracker. He slaps it onto the armor and has 4.5 seconds to get clear. The strange part was never the timing. It was the shape of the charge. A standard explosive pushes outward in every direction. This one was hollowed into a cone, so the blast collapsed inward into a single narrow jet of superheated metal fast enough to punch through more than 5 inches of steel. That jet doesn't rely on speed or mass the way a cannon shell does, only on physics that work exactly the same whether they're fired from a battleship or stuck onto a hull by hand. The catch was the delivery. Attaching it meant standing next to an enemy tank while its crew tried to kill you first. Germany's own engineers knew the science worked. What they still needed was a way to use it without a soldier standing within arm's reach of the hull. 20 Reichsmarks. That's what it cost Germany to kill a tank by 1944, about the price of a few packs of cigarettes on the wartime black market. The Panzerfaust took the same shaped charge warhead and put it on a disposable tube, launched by a small charge that vented backward instead of slamming into the shooter's shoulder. No recoil meant no need for the heavy engineering a real cannon requires, and that's what made it possible to build 8 million of them at a peak of 200,000 a month. The physics didn't care who was holding it. In the hedgerows of Normandy and the streets of Berlin, a single conscript with a $50 tube could disable a tank worth more than 1,000 times as much. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. 50 years later, the same idea would come back, this time aimed at a modern superpower. On New Year's Eve 1994, more than 1,000 Russian soldiers and over 100 armored vehicles pushed into Grozny, expecting the city to fall within days. Within 60 hours, hundreds of those soldiers were dead, captured, or missing, and dozens of tanks burned in the surrounding streets. Chechen fighters had done it with RPG-7 launchers worth a few $100s each, letting the column drive in before opening fire. A tank's main gun is built to fight at range. In a city, it can't angle steeply enough to hit a building's upper floors, and the turret traverses too slowly to track fighters moving between windows. Chechen teams fired in volleys from above and behind, hitting the roof and rear armor every tank on this list has struggled to protect. In the first month, Russian forces wrote off 225 armored vehicles, roughly a tenth of everything they'd sent into the city. Rooftops fixed the angle problem, but only for a few city blocks at a time. The next weapon wouldn't need a rooftop at all. It just needed to fly. By 2022, tanks had survived gasoline, steel obstacles, ditches, and shoulder-fired rockets. The next threat wasn't going to come from the ground at all. The war in Ukraine turned commercial camera drones costing a few $100s into precision anti-tank weapons, just an explosive warhead, a first-person camera, and a pilot flying it from miles away. The target was never the front of the tank. Frontal armor on a modern main battle tank is its thickest part, built to survive a direct hit from another tank's cannon. Drone pilots go for the turret roof and engine deck instead, sometimes less than 1.5 inches thick, because no designer ever expected an attack to come from directly overhead. In March of 2024, a $400 drone destroyed a Russian T-90M valued at an estimated $4.3 million. This wasn't a fluke. By 2024, Ukraine was manufacturing around 200,000 FPV drones a month, and open-source researchers had documented more than 3,000 Russian tanks destroyed, damaged, or captured in the war's first 2.5 years. Same weak point the Czech Hedgehog exploited from underneath in the 1930s. The answer was never a bigger gun. It was always finding the part of the machine nobody had reinforced. 85 years separate a Finnish soldier crouched behind a snowbank from a Ukrainian drone pilot wearing FPV goggles. The tools changed completely. The lesson never did. A tank is not an impenetrable machine. It's a set of trade-offs, armor for speed, protection for cost, and every trade-off leaves something exposed. The cheapest weapons on this list never tried to out-armor a tank. They found the part of the compromise designers had to leave thin and aimed there. Every generation since has spent its budget chasing the last gap that got exploited, adding weight and a new seam somewhere else on the hull. The machine gets stronger. The list of ways to stop it just keeps getting longer. If you want to see how modern militaries are trying to close these exact gaps, that breakdown is on screen now.